Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is, well, it's highly specific, highly technical, and frankly pretty high stakes.
It really is.
We're plunging into the political economy of imperial decline. And we're going to do that by connecting the immediate structural crisis happening right now in the physical silver market
Right.
to the long-term, predictable flaws that seem to plague all great powers.
You know, this is a story that has played out across civilizations for millennia. Why do great powers crumble? It's an old question. But our sources today show that the patterns are surprisingly consistent, and they're manifesting right now as a really dangerous cocktail of internal decay and external resource pressure.
A perfect storm, then.
You could say that. Our goal here is to give you a shortcut to understanding that exact convergence. We're tracking how constrained resources, how physical scarcity becomes the failure point for these huge financial and political systems.
And we're exploring what our sources are calling the silver inversion, which is, I guess, the moment that constrained geology and industrial evolution just violently collide with all that financial fragility.
That's a great way to put it. It's about how physical reality dictates geopolitical outcomes.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the immediate stressor, right? The physical market for silver.
We have to. And we need to begin by defining what's called the structural deficit. This is absolutely critical.
Why is that term so important?
Because it tells us this is not just a standard cyclical shortage. It's not something that's just going to correct itself in a year or two. This is a fundamental rewiring of how the market works.
Okay.
So 2023 marked the third consecutive year of a physical market deficit. That's where industrial investment demand just relentlessly exceeded the total supply from mining and recycling.
Third year in a row. And I read that the 2023 deficit was the largest on record.
The largest on record, exactly. So when you have a deficit running for 3 straight years, what do?
You had to pull from savings, from inventory.
You have to liquidate reserves. So the above-ground stocks, the inventories in banks and vaults, especially in London and New York, they're just being drawn down year after year.
That's the market's shock absorber.
Right. It is. And it's rapidly disappearing. It's revealing the bare metal reality underneath all the financial paperwork.
And on the other side of that equation, the demand. It's just an absolute industrial juggernaut. Our sources point to two forces that are basically non-negotiable.
Inelastic is the term they use.
Inelastic, right, meaning you have to buy it no matter the price.
Pretty much. Think of it like a hospital needing oxygen. You just pay whatever the price is. You have to have it.
So what's the first force?
Photovoltaics, PV solar panels. The global installation targets are just constantly rising.
And I know they're getting more efficient, using less silver per cell.
They are, but the sheer volume of new installations worldwide just completely overwhelms those efficiency gains. To meet climate and energy targets, the solar industry has to secure that silver. It's a key component.
Okay, so that demand curve is basically vertical. What's the second big force?
The second massive one is the AI and data center boom. Silver is critical, not just desirable, for this cutting-edge infrastructure.
How so? Where is it used?
We're talking about highly conductive contacts in power semiconductors, connectors, switches, all the complex electrical systems that power these gargantuan data warehouses.
So the scale of the global computing build-out is just a brand new, relentless source of demand.
A brand new source, compounding the pull from solar.
So, okay, if industrial demand is soaring and the reserves are draining, why don't the miners just ramp up production? Why can't the system respond to this incredibly clear price signal?
That is the absolute core of the supply rigidity issue. And it's geological, not financial.
What do you think?
Only about 25% of the world's silver comes from primary silver mines where, silver is the main thing they're looking for.
Just a quarter of it.
Just a quarter. The other massive 75% is a co-product or a byproduct of mining for base metals. Copper, lead, zinc, and gold. You can almost think of silver as a passenger on the copper and zinc trains.
Which means
What?
that silver supply is basically held hostage by the economics of copper.
Exactly. It cannot respond quickly to high silver prices because it is entirely locked in by the lengthy timelines of those base metal projects. If copper prices aren't high enough to justify a new mine, the silver that's in that deposit doesn't get mined either.
And these projects take years to develop.
5 to 10 years easily. So the structural deficit we see today is pretty much locked in for the foreseeable future.
And then on top of all that, there's this final layer of strategic pressure, this buy and hold stream.
Yes, we're seeing geopolitical and strategic stockpiling. Because silver is so critical in defense, tech avionics, sensors, and for energy security, governments are now putting it on their national critical minerals lists.
So that's metal being taken off the market permanently, not for consumption, but just to sit in a vault.
Precisely. It's for national security reserves, which just makes the physical scarcity even worse.
And the consequence of all this,
Mm-hmm.
this sustained physical shortage, is that the market itself starts to break down.
It breaks down entirely. We see these high, persistent premiums being paid for physical silver bars and coins over the spot price.
It was the paper price, right? The one traded on COMEX.
That's the one. And that divergence, where the actual physical bar costs way more than the paper promise, it signals profound tightness. But more importantly, it signals a tangible loss of faith in the paper market's ability to actually deliver the real thing.
That's a crucial distinction. Okay, so we've established the physical stressor, this inelastic demand slamming into this totally rigid supply. How does that immediate scarcity trigger a collapse in a system that's, already weakened by history?
And that's where we pivot to imperial decline. Our sources show this core destructive feedback loop where each internal weakness just makes another one worse, and it accelerates the whole collapse.
And this pattern is universal.
It seems to be. Whether we're talking about the Spanish Empire in the 17th century or the dominant powers of today.
Let's get into those specific patterns then, and the modern parallels. Let's start with what always seems to be the killer: fiscal overextension.
Fiscal overextension, absolutely. Unchecked military and bureaucratic spending. It eventually just outstrips the economy's capacity to pay for it all.
Like Rome trying to police its massive borders.
Exactly. Or Great Britain's crippling national debt after World War II. The modern equivalent is maintaining this global security umbrella. U.S. military spending, for example, exceeds the next 10 nations combined. Over 800 overseas bases.
But how does that cost specifically undermine things at home?
It becomes this non-productive burden that crowds out vital domestic investment. The interest payments on the debt alone start displacing R&D, infrastructure, education. The debt-to-revenue ratio soars.
And our sources say there's a danger zone for that ratio.
They do. When it's sustained above 200%, the empire has historically entered a danger zone where reinvesting in itself becomes structurally impossible without some kind of radical reform.
And that kind of rigidity, that institutional decay, always seems to follow the fiscal strain.
It does. The systems become calcified. They stifle innovation at the exact moment you need it most to survive. You can look back at Spain's rigid feudal system that couldn't adapt, or the Ottoman Empire banning the printing press until 1727.
Just resisting change because it threatened the existing power structures?
Yes, and the modern echo of that is the inertia of vested interests. It's modern lobbying blocking crucial infrastructure upgrades or climate adaptation, all to protect short-term profits for, say, fossil fuels or legacy finance. The system gets really good at preserving itself, even if that preservation guarantees its eventual failure.
And you can't ignore that deep, corrosive pattern of inequality and social fragmentation. It seems like wealth concentration is always both a symptom and an accelerant of decline.
It absolutely is. It erodes social cohesion. In Rome, you had the latifundia, these vast estates owned by the elite that displaced all the small farmers and created a massive landless underclass.
Which creates incredible internal fragility.
Deep fragility. And the data today is just snark. I mean, the Gini coefficient, which measures inequality, hit 0.52 in the U.S. in 2021. That's among the highest in the OECD.
And what does that mean in real terms?
It means the top 1% hold about 32% of the wealth, while the entire bottom 50% of the population holds just 2.6%. That kind of gap creates not just political polarization, but a deep distrust in the institutions themselves.
So when the next crisis hits, like a silver shortage,
Yeah.
the population is already too fractured to respond coherently.
Exactly. So besides the internal stress of debt and fragmentation, there's a key external indicator we should be watching.
And that is?
The sustained decline of the U.S. dollar share of global reserves. It's fallen from around 72% back in 2001 to about 59% today.
That's a huge drop.
It's a critical, persistent trend. It doesn't mean the dollar fails tomorrow, but it signals that the world is actively seeking and building viable alternatives, which chips away at the geopolitical leverage that has subsidized the empire for decades.
Which brings us to the theoretical scaffolding for all of this. To understand why empires fail structurally, we have to turn to the big thinkers.
We do. And we can start with the classical liberal critique from Adam Smith.
In The Wealth of Nations.
Right. Smith argued that colonies are actually a net drain on the home country. The defense costs are enormous, and they create inefficient monopolies. He saw empire as prioritizing splendid trophies, glory, status over long-term domestic productivity.
It's the ultimate short-termism, then.
It's elite capture. The costs are nationalized, but the profits are privatized.
Then moving forward a bit, you have Lenin's thesis, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism.
Yes, and Lenin argued that imperialism wasn't an accident, but an inevitable decaying phase of mature capitalism driven by the search for higher profits overseas.
And he had this concept of parasitism, right?
Parasitism is key. The core profits so heavily from its overseas investments that it stops investing productively at home. It deindustrializes. By 1914, Britain was earning twice as much from foreign investments as it was from domestic exports.
And that eventually creates your own rivals.
It guarantees it. Uneven development means the capital you export eventually builds up challengers.
And finally, Samir Amin's world systems view, which looks at the whole structural relationship.
Amin's view is that imperialism is permanent, and it's fundamentally driven by unequal development. The core actively underdevelops the periphery to enrich itself.
And it does that through its control of what he called the 5 monopolies.
Exactly. Finance, technology, resources, communication, and weapons. Decline, he argued, only accelerates when the periphery manages to erode those monopolies.
And here's where the theory shifts to resistance and strategy. This structural critique introduces the crucial idea of delinking.
Yes, Amin argued that nations should consciously break their dependent ties with the world system to reclaim their own sovereignty. And this isn't just theory. We can see it being put into practice today, in microcosm.
You're talking about those Gaelic communities in Scotland.
I am. Incredible real-world examples. Take the Isle of Egg. The residents mounted a community buyout of the island in 1997.
Right.
And then, in 2008, they launched Egg Electric, an entirely off-grid renewable system. Wind, hydro, solar.
They just bypassed the entire central power system.
They completely delinked from the UK mainland grid and the corporations that control it. That is a direct challenge to MN's resource and finance monopolies right at the local level. They achieved energy sovereignty.
And the St. Crofters did something similar with land control.
They did. They collectively purchased 21,000 acres of ancestral land. They replaced external control by some absentee speculator with democratic community governance.
That smashes the rentier monopoly over land.
It smashes it. These acts show that regeneration for the periphery, taking back control of land, energy, culture, happens in direct response to the stagnation of the core.
Those examples are fascinating. Locally, they show incredible resilience. But how do you scale that up? I mean, isn't it a bit naive to think a few community buyouts can withstand these massive global financial forces?
And that is the critical question, and it's where the convergence of the silver crisis and the imperial pattern dictates the answer. The core dynamic is this. The physical shortage acts as a hard boundary. The financial deterioration forces decentralization.
The center cannot hold.
The center cannot hold. The forces of physical scarcity are simply stronger than the financial fiction.
So the systemic chaos we're seeing, the ideological debates, a polarization of, what did the theorist Gramsci call that?
That is the war of position. It's the long-term ideological fight over whose money is real, whose history is true, which markets are legitimate.
The battle for hearts and minds.
Exactly. But the physical reality of the silver deficit, the fact that a solar panel maker must get their metal forces an immediate, desperate shift to the war of maneuver.
Physical survival.
Physical survival. Ideology gives way to immediate necessity.
And that's where deep delinking becomes more than just a political protest.
It stops being political theory and becomes a pure survival mechanism. When the imperial currency fails and the imperial subsidies stops flowing.
If the center can't afford to send services or protection,
why should the periphery, whether that's a small town or an allied nation, keep sending its resources or its allegiance? When the financial incentive evaporates, the ties just dissolve.
This leads us directly to what our sources call the archipelago scenario.
Yes. The world fractures into these local, resilient nodes, or islands of the real. And this is based on something called parallel necessities.
What's that?
It's the realization that people who touch the physical world, farmers, engineers, miners, logistics managers, they all come to the same practical conclusion at the same time. The paper system is failing to deliver physical goods.
The ultimate conflict then crystallizes into the physicals versus the virtuals.
Precisely. The physicals are those who produce and steward real assets. Silver, food, energy, copper. The virtuals are those who rely solely on paper debt and abstract financialization.
And the silver premium, that divergence we talked about, is the real-time proof of that conflict.
It's happening right now in the market. Those who need the physical asset no longer trust the paper promise.
And the scenario that really highlights this inversion of power is the red Clydeside 2.0.
This is the critical moment. It forecasts a return to radical industrial action, but grounded in physical reality. When the price of silver or any critical metal is suspended because the paper market completely fails.
The COMEX defaults.
Yes, the local producers and engineers will simply refuse the dying imperial currency. They will demand payment in weight and work in hard assets, other commodities, energy credits.
And that action, if it's replicated across enough key industries, forces a total institutional collapse.
The economic reality of needing physical metal defeats the legal fiction of the currency.
So to recap the overarching lesson of this entire deep dive, empires fall when their human responses to crises, elite hoarding, institutional rigidity, fiscal recklessness become tragically self-destructive.
It's a failure to adapt to new geopolitical and, crucially here, new physical and resource-based realities.
It's the prioritization of financial extraction over physical sustainability again and again.
Time and time again.
So what does this all mean for you as you watch these crises converge? Perhaps imperialism is doomed not primarily by some moral failure, but by a kind of mathematical inevitability. It just fundamentally violates the core principles of sustainable systems. It tries to perpetually extract more value than it reinvests or allows to regenerate. It is, at the end of the day, unsustainable by its very design.
It's the finite physical world finally asserting itself against infinite financial claims.
Keep exploring these critical themes, and thank you for diving deep with us.